Welcome to another weekend here on the platform. My name is Sam Omashe. Some people say that actually this issue of corruption can be traced to the time of IBB, and now he expanded it. And so at that time we had what can be described as a canonization of corruption. And we kept as a people justifying every dissent as if it was normal. And we have not recovered from that slope since.
Sure. That's the point I made earlier when I was saying that, you know, there were things that I feel terrible about from that era. And I'm not sure that he realized that that was what he was doing. Because he realized it. You know, it was just a laissez-faire attitude. And laissez-faire is dangerous. Yeah. You know, the French critical writer in the 1840s, Bastiat, and his critique of that time even goes as far as looking at the law and seeing it as a tool that can be justified and used even to abuse the greater good. Because man essentially wants gain without pain. If you leave man alone, if you don't have strong institutions to check man's conduct, if you don't have wise leadership, man will abuse his reality, thinking he's going for his own best interest. He will even shortchange his own long-term best interest. And that's what happened to Nigeria with the laissez-faire thinking of that era. You know, awaiting. They say, local government chairman, he wants to use siren. They say, let him use siren. You know, just let it go. Just let it go.
It's like you don't want, they don't want bread.
Let them eat cake.
Well, after the Trump era, it was actually clear, because I even tried to reflect this in my column, that the law is not enough. And what we witnessed during the Trump era, and especially the last election, was that the law can actually be used by a strong man to prevail over the people. So in other words, we have a situation where the strong man is stronger than the law, and the law cannot protect us. So it is not so much the law that is important, but our belief in the law. But once we lose our own sense of the belief in law, and the culture itself does not respect the law, then the law is of no instant, of no support for us. Well, what we have, therefore, is the failure and collapse of institutions.
You know, I don't know, 2016 or what year was that? 2006, sorry. I wrote a book titled Why Nations Are Poor. Some people keep asking, is it Why Nations Fail? Which I was written by Robinson and Asomoglu 11 years after my own book, Why Nations Fail. And basically the same principles under pin both books. And I offered in that book a framework of understanding what makes countries succeed and what is responsible for failure of countries. 6 major sets of interdependent variables. 1 is the policy choices that you make. 2 is the strength of your institutions. 3 is the quality of your human capital. 4 is the culture of entrepreneurship. 5th, and very importantly, which holds all of this together, is culture, your values. 6th, leadership. Because leadership sets the tone of culture. Now, pushed in one interview years ago, I said, which is the most important? I said, you know, really, if you want to understand the progress of a society, you have to look at institutions, you have to look at culture. And because leaders set the tone of culture, you have to look at leadership. The trajectory of leadership, culture, and institutions determines whether a country makes progress or not. If you look at Nigeria today, our institutions are hopelessly weak, abused every day. You know, what do institutions do? They set boundaries to conduct. Yes. So they reduce speculation because you know you can anticipate behavior, which is, again, the subject of another book I wrote years ago, Managing Uncertainty. Yeah. You know, if you then can deal with the institutions and culture stout, you will see you're making progress. But like I said, our institutions are so weak, culture is fragile. And the damage that happened in those years that you talked about, the damage to culture, which essentially, you know, in my view, was a collapse of culture. Nigeria is so dysfunctional because the institutions are weak, culture is in a terrible state, and leadership is not setting a new tone. That's what's painful about why leadership failure in Nigeria, because we've never needed as desperately leaders to set a tone for culture. If you were a leader that you didn't even do anything, you just set a tone for culture that does two things. One, let people know that they must produce. They don't produce, they die. It's about production. Because right now, Nigerians don't produce. We just want revenues collected. Yes. And then, second, dignity of the human person. Because if you don't treat people right, if their self-worth is nothing, then they disconnect. Those are the two biggest challenges in Nigeria. We don't produce, we don't treat people right. Impunity reigns. You know, a uniform is the authority to bully. Any kind of uniform at all. If you see a Nigerian, just give him uniform or call him a regulator.
Even a cassock.
A cassock. It's the same thing. It's a uniform. It's a uniform. You know.
Well, you've started this your new pet project now called Rescue Nigeria. Now tell us about it.
Well, you see, and again, because of the limitation of the worldview that has been created in Nigeria, people see, oh, forming party is bigger. The project is about these factors that we're talking about and how we can change them. The most critical vehicle in a democracy for doing that, the nature of the public sphere. This German that I admire very much, Jürgen Habermas, who is the philosopher of the public sphere. And Habermas will tell you that modernity and democracy are anchored by the idea of rational public conversation. If there's one thing that is not happening in Nigeria, it is rational public conversation. So how do you get people to think intelligently about their problems? If you look at what has happened to China, Mao, great ideologue, powerful man and everything, and China was in misery. GDP per capita in China was half of Nigeria. And then Deng emerges, surprisingly, after Mao's death. Deng's constant harping. In 1978, I can literally, off my head, read off speeches he made in 78, including the one of 13th December of 1978, is knowledge, intellect will determine where we're going as a country. Our party, the Communist Party, must respect men of knowledge and intellect. 30 years after, one generation after, China's GDP is 30 times that of Nigeria. So, you need to be able to create the kind of party that Deng created. You need to have the kind of leaders that Deng nurtured.
Yeah, one of the problems actually is, now you're mentioning some of these countries, is a lack of elite consensus, which is what they say is a problem here, but also It's a problem now with the United States of America.
America's story is sort of slightly different, and I like to engage the American one. You know, a couple of books have been written on Trump and America. Out of Cambridge, David Runciman, who was the head of Department of Politics at Cambridge, has written one, has a similar title as one written by two Harvard professors, Stephen Levitsky and David Ziblatt.
Ziblatt, yeah.
Ziblatt. And they actually, asking the question, is this how democracy ends? But I think to understand the point that they were trying to make properly, you have to actually go to the work that's been done at the Center for Moral Cognition at Harvard, which is run by Joshua Green. And Joshua Green has written a book that's titled Moral Tribes, Emotion, Reason, and the Gap Between Us and Them. What has happened in America, which is a problem here too, is that Trump was a very clever manipulator of emotions. And in creating this us versus them, obliterating rational conversation, going back to Habermas, Trump managed to pitch America against itself and made the condition of a strong man versus institutions a major challenge of recent conversation. In a similar manner, but coming from a completely weak base without strong institutions, because Trump received a lot of pushback from institutions.
From his own party.
Yes. So that's the value of strong institutions. Here, it doesn't exist. A Nigerian leader wants to talk, his aide says to him.
But the institutions were pushing back.
Yeah.
Imagine that
they didn't push back.
Vice President, as a man,
yes,
decided, this was institution,
yes,
without institutions, decided to follow Trump. It will have brought institutions
down. That is the point. That is the point that we're making, that the culture, because it was the personal values of Pence that saved that moment.
Yes.
But you see why values matter, why culture matters. In the case of Nigeria, it does not exist. A vice president knows that everything he stands for is being destroyed. And he says, I beg you, keep quiet. Otherwise, I won't fly in that private jet. This is what we must change, really, as a country. So, a Nigerian leader is about to talk, and his aide said to him, Your Excellency, that thing you're about to say is very correct, sir. He has not said it. They don't know.
Whatever you want to say
is correct.
Whatever you are trying to think,
you think of,
not even thought.
This is correct, sir. So how can you go forward with that kind of culture? And so that's a tragedy of the Nigerian condition. And this whole thing that we are working on is about saying, let's rethink it. Central to this is political parties. Nigerian political parties have not functioned like political parties. I have tried to engage. From a teaching point of view, how can one's participation help teach the right way to do things? I like to think that a lecture I gave on political parties, the leadership annual lecture of, I think, around 2012, maybe, I don't remember what year, gave impetus to what led to the APC. I think so, because I remember after the lecture, Paul Unongo ran to me. I was actually, Uncle Sam, Amuka was sitting just by the edge of the high table where the podium from which I spoke was. He looked at me as I finished speaking. He said, you are deep, oh. I said, see trouble. Am I supposed to be shallow? But as he was saying that, Paul Onongo rang to me and said, look, I want to close these doors. You people should not leave this place until you found something that can dislodge this PDP. Well, sadly, we found something that dislodged PDP and got us worse. You know? Anyway, so, but it happened because we did not try to build a political party. We tried to do machine politics, to build a machine that can take over power. A political party, as I defined it, going all the way to Roberto Michel's and, you know, organization and political parties and oligarchies and all of that. First of all, it needs to envision the world that it wants to see come about. It needs to create a social system that finds people whose values align to what can get us to that world that they have dreamt of. They need to build systems that will socialize those people in the direction of those goals. Build patterns for questioning where we're going, internal patterns. There's a table somewhere over there in this house where the now Vice President of Shibajo, myself, and two or three others, at the suggestion of the former governor of Lagos, sat down to develop a roadmap for the party. Well, I'm not so sure that the dreams that we walk through, and the first thing was to fence out people they thought would think too much. So I think the first victim of the APC government was me. The day the election won is, get this guy out here. We don't want to hear his voice. You know, I said, take your thing and go, you know. And we just did not manage to build a political party in the classic sense of a political party. So it had no soul. It had no social mission. Besides, some people have got power. And that's what state capture really is about. Power for what?
Now that you've got power,
what's it going to do with it? And we've seen it has come home to roost.
How is it related to our culture, this idea that we've got power and what are we going to do with it? So like the song used to say that, now that we've got power, what are we going to do with it? Now that we've got law, what are we going to do with it? This song is saying, now that we've got power, what are we going to do with it? How is our culture related to this?
There's several ways of saying that. The people talk about the Kabiyesi phenomenon. You know, you don't talk to the king. But that is a bit of a shallow view of Kabiyesi. The Oyomesi, the kingmakers in Oyo, absolutely, they look at the Oba and it's not functioning well.
That's how they got they flushed out Aole. But remember when it happened, it led to the destruction of the
empire. Yeah. But you see, it was a check and balance.
Yes.
Because the fact that
checks and balances is abuse. Because that's what happened with the fall of the
empire. Once they send you the calabash,
yes,
your head is demanded.
Yes.
You've got to go. So I do think that saying that our culture is not a completely true interpretation of things. Don't forget that the cultures that came together as Nigeria are not homogeneous. Yeah. You had the acephalous, quote-unquote, states. Yeah. Adele Afibo and co. Would talk about how those so-called headless societies organize themselves. And there could have been lessons drawn from those societies in the way that we organized our society. And you could have mixed some. But I think that the real truth is that power just fell into the wrong hands. They were not builders, they were not development people, yeah. I mean, look at Singapore. Look at how people forget that Lee Kuan Yew started as a communist. Yeah. But you see the way that he transformed it into...
Evolved, yeah.
So I think that the real problem of Nigeria is not our tradition. It was just an error in the choice of people who got to leadership position. And this is why this initiative that we're dealing with, we're not, look, part of the damage today in Nigeria is that the process has been so monetized that if you follow this system, you will never get a leader that will take Nigeria in the right direction. It's impossible. He would have stolen billions to be able to become president. Or those backing him would have stolen billions from the same state treasury. What do you think will happen if you have a brain? If you teach business like me.
Just like what, was it you people there? There was this other comedian in America said, I want to make enough money to become a Republican.
No! I think the more beautiful rendition of that was when this, what's his name, the great black guitarist, excuse me, while I hate this guy, Jimi Hendrix. And Jimi Hendrix was twerking away the greatest guitarist in the world, and somebody says, if you're making enough money, I'll go and study music.
It's kind of absurd.
So we got a problem, and we must realize that this state, this structure, this way, will never bring Nigeria progress. So we have to be honest with ourselves as an elite and say, this is not working. What do we do to create something? And this is why the movement that I am pushing for is not so much found a party. No. People will say, okay, so who is the financier? Once you bring 3 or 4 governors who can deplete their state treasury to finance it, you're back where you started. Yeah. So you've got to say, all the parties, the new one you want to create, or ones, because my thought is, let's 2 new ones, as exemplars to what democracy really is. Reform the current ones, because they are going nowhere if you don't reform them. Who is the chief financier? This is the CCS state. Political party in Nigeria is a special purpose vehicle for a business enterprise by those who are funding. Got to change that. Can't make any progress with that. And so that's really central to the initiative. And I hope people can fully understand that. You see, I have a problem, personal problem. I left the United States the day my PhD thesis was accepted in 1982 to come home. All my friends, not all, most of my friends, who said, let's work for 1 year and buy a car, they're still there. They're still there, or they came and went back. So I think that I made a commitment decision. It's Nigeria. So I left Nigeria with 1 suitcase. I came back with 2 suitcases, which I consider 100% progress. On my way back to Nigeria, I made a resolution on that flight. I said, I know there are many things to criticize, and I will criticize them, because I'm a reporter at heart. But I must make an effort to do something about everything that I criticize. And that's why for the last 40 years, I have really been overstretched, spread thin. But you know what? If I look at all those efforts, they have only taught me that Nigeria can be that dream, in spite of the apparent failures of my, whatever you call it, my efforts. I thought, okay, rational public conversation is important. So I started a television program, Batito's Gang, to encourage it. Nigerian private sector runs away from anything that is controversial. So for 22 years, I have produced and aired a television series because I believe that this will help Nigeria move forward. So first issue I hit when I arrived in Nigeria, somebody I know, successful businessman, suddenly is dying of cancer. And he says to his wife, hey, I'm sorry what I'm doing to you, because I know my brothers will move in and take everything I have. They're already doing it while I'm still alive. Please don't fight them or they will kill you and nobody will raise the children. I thought, this is absurd. And it happened a few months later. And I said, no. So I created a widow support program. been running it for 30-something years. I can go from 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, 20 things like that. I think I've earned being able to say, I've done my bit. And then I will deal with the problem. I joked with poor Chinua Achebe. I said to Chinua Achebe, Ugonabo, as the man of two titles. I said, you know this one that you are living in America, and this your old age, you know that if the ancestors, if God should ask you to come, and the ancestors send spirits to bring you, they may miss the road. They may not see how to climb the 7 hills and 7. Achebe said to me, you this rascal. But I have so drained myself and still get lashed by people who don't even know what happens in my head. And I'm wondering, isn't it time to play Achebe? Let the spirit struggle to find me.
Yeah, you still want to do rescue Nigeria. Maybe on that note. So that was Professor Utomi. Thank you very much for being on this show.
It's a great pleasure.
Thank you. My poem on Leah Sharibu will be read to you now.
Leah, you may feel airless in that man trap known as wedlock. No way out. But don't envy the street or highway. Prisons like yours are now luxury because the express has become a slaughter slab where the traveler swaps destiny for destination, a date with their maker in heaven or another place, in bushes or jungles or ramshackle havens of fear.
Thank you for being on this show. You can join me on my column at www.samomashei.com. And until next week, be good.